The mountain village of Greystone was the kind of place most travelers passed without noticing. It sat quietly between steep pine-covered hills, its wooden homes leaning slightly with age, its narrow roads dusted with gravel and fallen leaves. Merchants rarely visited. Soldiers almost never came. Life there moved slowly, guided by the rhythm of sunrise, farm work, and evening fires. To the rest of the kingdom, Greystone was insignificant. But to a tired old man named Rowan Hale, it was home. Rowan lived alone at the far edge of the village, where the road turned into a narrow trail climbing toward the higher mountains. His small house stood beside a crooked oak tree whose branches shaded the porch where he spent most evenings. The house wasn't impressive, just rough stone walls, a patched roof, and windows that rattled whenever the wind blew hard. But Rowan kept it tidy. A few carved wooden chairs sat on the porch. Flower boxes hung beneath the windows. Lanterns lit the steps at night so travelers wouldn't stumble in the dark. Once, long ago, Rowan had been a soldier. He had marched through distant deserts, sailed across stormy seas, and fought in battles most villagers could barely imagine. But that life had ended decades earlier. His hair had turned gray, his joints had stiffened, and the scars he carried reminded him every morning that some wars never truly left you. So Rowan had chosen quiet. He spent his days fixing tools for neighbors, chopping firewood, and tending the small vegetable garden behind his house. Sometimes travelers stopped for directions, and Rowan always offered water or a place to rest. It was simply who he was. War had taught him that kindness was rarer and far stronger than violence. One autumn evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains and painted the sky orange, Rowan was sitting on his porch carving a small wooden whistle. The air smelled of pine and cool earth. Then he heard something strange. At first it sounded like distant thunder. A deep rumbling echo rolled across the mountains, low and heavy. Rowan looked up slowly. Storms sometimes formed in the higher peaks, but the sky above Greystone was perfectly clear. The rumble came again, closer this time. Then the wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a powerful gust of warm air that rattled the porch lantern. Rowan frowned. He had heard that sound before. Many years ago, far from Greystone. Wings. Huge wings. Moments later, a massive shadow passed across the ground. Rowan stood carefully, leaning slightly on the porch railing as he looked toward the darkening sky. And then he saw it. A dragon. It emerged from behind the mountain ridge like a living storm, enormous wings beating slowly against the twilight. Its scales shimmered faintly like silver under the fading sunlight, and its long tail curved behind it as it struggled to stay airborne. But something was wrong. Dragons did not fly like that. The creature was unsteady, drifting lower with each wing beat. Its flight wasn't graceful, it was desperate. Rowan could see the dragon's movements growing weaker as it approached the valley. Then, with a final exhausted roar, the dragon began to fall. The massive body descended toward the forest beyond the village, crashing through treetops with a thunderous explosion of snapping branches and flying leaves. The ground shook slightly. Birds scattered in frightened flocks. For a long moment, the valley became silent again. Inside the village, dogs barked nervously and several lanterns flickered on in windows as people looked outside in confusion. Rowan remained standing on his porch, staring toward the forest. Most people in Greystone had never seen a dragon before. They were creatures of legend, rulers of the high skies who lived far beyond the mountains. Kingdoms respected them, armies avoided them, and when dragons fell from the sky, something was very wrong. Rowan sighed quietly. "Guess the evening just got complicated," he muttered. He stepped inside, grabbed his old lantern, and lifted the heavy walking staff he kept near the door. It had once been a soldier's spear shaft, long since worn smooth with age. Then he started down the forest trail. The walk took nearly 20 minutes. The forest was darker now, shadows stretching between the tall pines. Broken branches littered the ground where the dragon had crashed through the canopy. The smell of smoke and hot metal filled the air. Rowan pushed through a line of bushes and finally reached the clearing where the dragon had fallen. Even after years of seeing strange things during the war, the sight stopped him cold. The dragon was enormous. Its body filled nearly half the clearing, silver scales reflecting lantern light like polished armor. One massive wing lay twisted against the ground, and faint smoke curled from several cracked scales along its side. But the dragon was alive. Barely. Its chest rose slowly with shallow breaths, and its golden eyes flickered weakly as Rowan stepped closer. Most people would have run. Some might have tried to kill the wounded beast before it recovered. Rowan did neither. Instead, he studied the dragon carefully, the same way a field medic once studied injured soldiers. Wing fracture, he murmured. Burn damage too. The dragon watched him silently. Its enormous head lowered slightly toward the ground, and Rowan could see exhaustion in its eyes. An ancient creature pushed far beyond its strength. For a long moment, human and dragon simply looked at each other. Then Rowan sighed again. Well, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Can't leave you out here. Hunters would panic. Soldiers might come. The dragon blinked slowly, almost confused by the calm tone. Rowan pointed back toward the trail. My porch isn't much, he added. But it's dry, and I've got a roof. The dragon made a low rumbling sound. Not threatening, more like tired disbelief. Rowan chuckled. Yeah, I know. Strange offer. He turned and started walking back toward his house. For a few seconds nothing happened. Then the ground trembled softly behind him. The dragon was moving, slowly, painfully, but following. By the time they reached Rowan's small house, the moon had risen above the mountains. The silver dragon collapsed beside the porch with a deep, exhausted thud, curling its injured wing carefully against its body. Rowan set his lantern down and leaned against the railing. Not exactly comfortable, he admitted, but it'll do for the night. The dragon closed its eyes, and for the first time since crashing from the sky, it slept. Rowan didn't know it yet, but the tired creature resting beside his porch wasn't just any dragon. It was the Sky Sovereign, the ancient ruler of every dragon that flew above the world. And by sunrise, the entire sky would come looking for their missing queen. Rowan woke before sunrise the next morning, just as he had every day for the past 30 years. Old habits from his soldier days never truly disappeared. His body rose with the quiet discipline of someone who had spent a lifetime waking before danger could find him. But today, the moment he opened the front door and stepped onto his porch, he remembered that the world had changed overnight. A dragon lay beside his house. The enormous silver creature was still curled near the porch steps, its injured wing folded awkwardly against the ground. In the pale blue light of dawn, its scales looked almost like frost-covered steel. Slow breaths lifted its massive chest, sending warm clouds of steam into the cool morning air. Rowan leaned against the porch railing and studied the creature carefully. Still alive, he murmured. Up close, the damage looked worse than it had the night before. Several scales along the dragon's shoulder were cracked, revealing dark bruising beneath them. One of the wing joints was badly twisted, and dried streaks of blood marked the edges of its torn membrane. Rowan scratched his beard thoughtfully. Not pretty, he admitted. The dragon's golden eye slowly opened. For a moment it simply watched him. No growling, no threatening movement, just quiet observation. Rowan gave a small nod, the way soldiers sometimes greeted each other after surviving a hard night. Morning. The dragon blinked once, as if still surprised the strange little human was speaking so casually. Rowan stepped down from the porch and walked toward the well beside his house. He lowered the bucket, filled it with cold water, and carried it back carefully. The dragon watched every step. When Rowan placed the bucket on the ground, the dragon lowered its massive head slightly, sniffing the water. After a moment, it carefully extended a long tongue and drank. The bucket emptied in seconds. Rowan chuckled. Right, he said. You're a bit bigger than my usual guests. He went back to the well 3 more times. By the 4th bucket, the dragon seemed a little more alert. Its eyes had brightened slightly, though exhaustion still clung to every movement. Rowan sat down on the porch step. You'll need food too, he said. That's where things get tricky. The dragon tilted its head faintly. Rowan sighed. Closest thing I've got is goat stew. Not sure if dragons like stew. For the first time, the dragon made a soft sound that almost resembled amusement. Rowan blinked. "Ha!" he muttered. "Didn't expect that." But before he could say anything else, the dragon suddenly lifted its head sharply. Its golden eyes narrowed. Rowan felt it too. A deep vibration rolled through the air, faint but growing stronger. It wasn't thunder. It was wings. Many wings. Rowan stood slowly and looked toward the eastern mountains. Dark shapes were appearing along the horizon. At first they were tiny, barely visible against the morning sky. Then the sunlight touched them. Dragons. Dozens of them. Massive silhouettes circled high above the mountain ridges, their wings catching the rising sun like living shadows. Some were red like burning embers, others dark as night. A few shimmered with bronze and gold. They were searching, and they were getting closer. Rowan rubbed his face. "Well," he muttered, "that's not good." The injured dragon beside his house let out a low rumble. It wasn't fear. It was frustration. Rowan looked at it again, studying the creature more carefully now. The other dragons flying overhead were enormous, but none looked quite like this one. Their scales were darker, rougher. The silver dragon beside him looked different. Older, stronger, even injured. It carried a quiet authority that was impossible to ignore. Then Rowan noticed something else. Near the dragon's neck, partially hidden beneath its scales, was a faint glowing pattern, a symbol etched into the armor-like plates of its hide. Rowan leaned closer. His eyes widened. He had seen that symbol before many years ago, carved into ancient stone pillars near the border of the northern kingdoms. It meant only one thing: sovereign. His gaze slowly lifted back to the dragon's eyes. "You're not just any dragon, are you?" he whispered. The dragon held his gaze silently. Above them, the circling dragons grew louder as they approached the valley. Villagers had begun stepping outside their homes now, pointing nervously toward the sky. Fear spread quickly through Greystone as people realized the impossible truth. An entire dragon flight was gathering above their quiet mountain village. Rowan looked back toward the house. Then he looked at the injured dragon again. "All right," he sighed. He stood up and grabbed a large canvas tarp from beside the woodpile. The dragon watched curiously as Rowan dragged it toward the porch. "You're too big to hide properly," Rowan admitted. "But we might slow them down a little." He tossed the tarp gently over the dragon's injured wing and part of its body, blending the silver scales slightly with the shadow of the house. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Rowan stepped back and folded his arms. "Try not to move too much," he said. The dragon blinked slowly. High above, the first of the searching dragons began descending toward the valley. Their massive wings stirred the clouds. Rowan exhaled. "Well," he muttered quietly, "let's see how this goes." He still didn't fully understand why he was protecting the creature. But one thing felt certain. The tired dragon that had chosen his porch last night wasn't just a wounded traveler. It was the ruler of the skies. And somehow, the fate of the entire valley now rested on the quiet courage of one old human standing between a dragon queen and the army searching for her. The next morning began quietly, but Elias sensed something had changed. When he stepped outside with his coffee, the dragon was already awake. It sat on the edge of the porch roof like a stone statue, wings folded tightly, its silver scales glimmering faintly in the sunrise. But today the creature looked stronger. The wound on its wing had sealed almost completely, and the slow, painful breathing from yesterday was gone. "Looks like you're feeling better," Elias said softly. The dragon turned its head toward him. Its eyes, deep, intelligent, ancient, studied him in a way that made Elias feel strangely small. Then something unexpected happened. The dragon lowered its head. Not just slightly, fully lowering its massive crown until its snout touched the wooden boards of the porch. It was a bow. Elias blinked. You don't have to do that." But the dragon didn't move. For several seconds it remained there, completely still, as if offering a silent thanks. Only then did it lift its head again. Elias scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "You're welcome, I guess." The moment felt strangely emotional. For reasons he couldn't explain, Elias felt like the creature understood far more than an ordinary animal ever could. Then the wind changed. A low rumble echoed across the sky. At first Elias thought it was thunder. But the sky was clear. The rumble grew louder. Then the sound of engines followed. Elias looked up, and his stomach dropped. Dozens of enormous ships were descending through the clouds. They were unlike anything he had ever seen before. Sleek, dark vessels shaped like blades cutting through the air. Their hulls shimmered with strange energy patterns. And they were heading directly toward his valley. The dragon stiffened. Its wings spread halfway. Not in fear. In readiness. Elias stepped back. "Those yours?" The dragon didn't answer, but its gaze locked onto the approaching fleet with unmistakable authority. Within minutes, the ships surrounded the valley like silent predators. They hovered above the forest, casting enormous shadows over the land. One ship, far larger than the others, descended slowly until it hovered just beyond Elias's cabin. A ramp extended from its underside. Figures began walking down. They were tall, easily 8 feet high, wearing dark armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. Each carried long weapons that hummed with energy. Their helmets resembled dragon skulls. Behind them came something even stranger. More dragons. 3 of them. Massive creatures with scales of bronze, emerald, and midnight blue. Each one far larger than the wounded dragon Elias had sheltered. When those dragons saw the silver one on the porch, they immediately lowered their heads. Elias's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. The armored soldiers approached cautiously. Their formation was precise, disciplined. But when they reached the bottom of the porch steps, something surprising happened. Every single soldier knelt. Weapons lowered. Heads bowed. Elias blinked. "Okay. That's new." One of the armored figures stepped forward. Unlike the others, his helmet retracted, revealing a stern face with pale skin and glowing amber eyes. He spoke in a deep, steady voice. "Great Sky Sovereign, we feared you had fallen." Elias froze. "Sky Sovereign?" The man continued. "Our search fleets have crossed 7 star systems. The Empire believed you were lost after the ambush." The silver dragon rose slowly to its full height. For the first time since Elias had seen it, the creature looked truly powerful. Its wings expanded wide. Its body radiated authority. The other dragons lowered themselves even further. The soldiers pressed their fists against their chests in reverence. The armored man turned slightly, and finally noticed Elias standing awkwardly on the porch. Their eyes met. The man studied him carefully. "You are human." Elias raised a hand slowly. Yeah." The soldier's expression shifted, confusion mixed with curiosity. "You sheltered her." Elias frowned. "Her?" The soldier gestured respectfully toward the silver dragon. Elias slowly turned his head toward the creature he had been feeding leftover chicken to. The Dragon Queen, the ruler of the skies, the most powerful being in their empire. She looked back at him quietly. Then she stepped forward. The ground trembled beneath her weight. Elias braced himself. But instead of roaring or flying away, the enormous dragon gently lowered her head beside him and nudged his shoulder, like a cat asking for attention. The soldiers stared in absolute disbelief. The armored commander's voice dropped to a whisper. "She has never shown affection to anyone outside the royal bloodline." Elias awkwardly patted the dragon's snout. "Well, she was cold." Silence filled the valley. Then the commander suddenly knelt again, this time directly toward Elias. "You saved the life of our empress." Elias nearly dropped his coffee mug. "I what?" The commander spoke with absolute seriousness. "Had she died here, the empire would have fallen into civil war." The other soldiers lowered their heads deeper. "You protected not only our ruler," the commander said, "but billions of lives." Elias looked at the dragon. The dragon looked at him. He sighed. "All I did was give you my porch." The silver dragon let out a soft rumbling sound, almost like laughter. Then something extraordinary happened. She turned toward the commander. and spoke, not with sound, but with a deep vibration that echoed through the air itself. The commander listened, eyes widening. When the dragon finished, the commander looked back at Elias. His expression had completely changed. Now it held something close to awe. The Empress has issued a decree. Elias groaned quietly. That doesn't sound good. The commander stood. No human has ever received such an honor. Elias rubbed his forehead. Please don't say I'm being drafted into an alien empire. The commander shook his head slowly. Far greater than that. He gestured toward the sky, where the enormous fleet hovered silently. From this day forward, this world is under the personal protection of the Dragon Throne. Elias blinked. What? The commander continued. No empire will invade this system. No fleet will attack this planet. No force in the galaxy will harm the one who saved the Empress. The soldiers struck their armored fists to their chests again. Elias stood there on his wooden porch, wearing an old flannel shirt and holding a half-empty coffee mug, while an alien empire pledged protection to his entire planet. The dragon gently bumped his shoulder again. Elias sighed. You're still sleeping on the porch tonight, aren't you? The Empress blinked slowly, which Elias was beginning to realize meant yes. And high above them, the fleet of 1,000 stars waited patiently for the human who had unknowingly protected the ruler of the skies. Elias never imagined that the quiet valley he had lived in for 20 years would become the center of galactic attention. Yet that was exactly what happened. By noon, the sky above the mountains was filled with ships, sleek war cruisers, transport carriers, and dragon riders circling in wide protective arcs. The enormous fleet hovered silently, like dark stars hanging above the clouds. Elias sat on the edge of his porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The silver dragon, now officially revealed as the Empress of the Dragon Throne, rested beside the cabin, her massive body curled comfortably around the clearing as if she had always lived there. And somehow, Elias had become the most important human in the system. The commander of the fleet, who introduced himself as Commander Valor, stood respectfully several steps away from the porch. Even though he commanded thousands of soldiers and dragons, he behaved like a careful guest. The Empress will recover fully within 2 days, Valor explained. Her injuries were severe, but your care prevented infection and internal collapse. Elias scratched his beard. All I did was clean the wound and give her a blanket. Valor shook his head slightly. To most beings in the galaxy, approaching an injured dragon queen would be suicide. Elias glanced toward the enormous silver creature beside the cabin. The dragon opened one eye lazily. Elias raised his hands defensively. Hey, you seemed polite. The Empress released a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground. Valor smiled faintly. That sound means amusement. Great, Elias muttered. Good to know she laughs at me. But the peaceful moment didn't last long. A young officer suddenly ran down the ramp of one of the hovering ships. He knelt quickly beside Commander Valor. Commander, urgent transmission from the outer fleet. Valor's expression hardened instantly. Report. The enemy armada has been located. Elias looked up slowly. Enemy? Valor nodded grimly. The forces that ambushed the Empress. Elias's stomach tightened. What exactly attacked her? Valor turned toward the sky where the fleet hovered. A coalition of rival empires. The moment they believed the Empress had fallen, they began preparing for war. Elias exhaled slowly. That sounds bad. Valor's voice remained calm. It would have been catastrophic. Without the Empress, the Dragon Throne would fracture. Civil war would spread across our territory. Elias looked toward the silver dragon again. She lifted her head, her eyes suddenly sharp and alert. Whatever weakness she had shown yesterday was gone. She looked like a storm waiting to be unleashed. The officer continued speaking. The enemy armada has entered this system. Elias nearly spilled his coffee. They what? Valor's gaze turned cold. They likely came to confirm the Empress's death. Elias pointed upward. Do they see that giant fleet you brought? They do. Then why would they come here? Valor answered quietly. Because they believe we are protecting a corpse. The clearing fell silent. The Empress slowly stood. Her enormous wings stretched wide, silver scales flashing in the sunlight like living armor. The ground trembled beneath her weight. Every dragon in the sky immediately roared in response. Elias covered his ears. Okay. That's loud. Commander Valor bowed his head toward the dragon. Your command, my Empress. The silver dragon lifted her head toward the clouds. For a moment, the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. Then she roared. It wasn't just sound. It was power. The roar echoed across the mountains, shaking trees, rattling windows, and rolling through the sky like thunder from the beginning of time. Every ship in the fleet instantly shifted formation. Weapons activated. Dragon riders mounted their beasts. Engines flared. Valor turned toward Elias. You may wish to go inside your cabin. Elias stared at the sky where distant lights were beginning to appear above the atmosphere. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. He started toward the door. But the Empress suddenly lowered her massive head in front of him, blocking his path. Elias froze. Is this where I get eaten? Instead, the dragon gently nudged him again. Then she lowered one wing beside the porch. Valor smiled slightly. She is offering you protection. Elias blinked. You mean, under her wing? Literally. Elias looked at the incoming warships glowing in the upper sky. Then he looked at the dragon's enormous wing. Okay, that actually seems reasonable. He stepped closer. The Empress curled her wing around the cabin like a living shield. Above them, the first enemy ships broke through the clouds. Hundreds of them. Dark, jagged warships covered in weapons. The valley filled with the sound of engines and distant explosions. Elias stood beside the dragon's massive body as the fleet of the dragon throne surged forward to meet the invaders. The sky turned into a battlefield of fire and light. Ships clashed. Dragons roared. Energy beams tore across the clouds. Elias whispered quietly, watching the chaos above. All this? Because you slept on my porch. The Empress glanced down at him. Her glowing eyes softened. Then she launched into the sky. Her wings exploded open like silver thunder. Within seconds she was soaring toward the battlefield. Faster than any ship. The dragons followed their queen. And for the first time, the invading fleet realized their terrible mistake. The Empress of the Dragon Throne was not dead. She was very much alive. And she was furious. High above the mountains, the sky itself seemed to burn as the Dragon Queen led her army into war. Down in the valley, Elias stood alone on his porch, staring at the most unbelievable battle humanity had never known existed. He sighed and picked up his cold coffee again. Well, he muttered, this is definitely not a normal Tuesday. The battle above the valley raged like a storm made of fire. From Elias's porch, the sky looked as if the heavens themselves had cracked open. Dragon wings flashed through the clouds while warships streaked across the horizon, firing bright streams of plasma that burned glowing scars through the sky. Elias leaned against the wooden railing of his porch, staring upward in disbelief. 24 hours ago, the most exciting thing in his life had been fixing the hinge on his barn door. Now a galactic war was happening directly above his house. Yep, he muttered to himself, taking another sip of his now terrible coffee. Definitely not normal. A thunderous boom shook the mountains as one of the enemy ships exploded high above the clouds. Flaming fragments rained down like falling stars before burning away in the upper atmosphere. Moments later, 3 enormous dragons streaked across the sky, chasing another ship toward the horizon. Even from the ground, Elias could feel the power in their roars vibrating through the air. But none of them moved like the silver dragon. The Empress, she was everywhere at once. Elias spotted her slicing through the battlefield like living lightning, her massive wings cutting through the clouds as she twisted and turned through enemy fire with impossible speed. One moment she was diving through a formation of ships, ripping through their hulls with her claws. The next moment she was blasting a cruiser apart with a beam of brilliant silver flame that tore the vessel in half. The enemy fleet clearly hadn't expected this. Panic spread through their formation. Ships scattered. Command vessels attempted to retreat. But it was too late. The dragons were already among them. Elias watched as a group of dragon riders surrounded one of the largest enemy warships. The dragons spiraled around it like hunting hawks before unleashing coordinated streams of fire that overwhelmed the ship's shields. The vessel erupted in a blinding explosion. Elias whistled quietly. "Remind me never to make dragons angry." But even as the battle raged above, something unexpected happened on the ground. A small transport craft descended slowly into the valley clearing beside Elias's cabin. The ship landed gently, its engines humming softly before shutting down. The hatch opened. Several armored soldiers stepped out, followed by a tall figure dressed in elegant silver robes. The man walked forward slowly, his posture calm but respectful. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Well, that looks important." The man stopped several steps away and gave a slight bow. "Human Elias Carter." Elias blinked. "You know my name?" "We know everything about you now." Elias scratched the back of his neck. "That's a little creepy." The man smiled faintly. "I am Chancellor Varen, advisor to the Dragon Throne." Elias leaned against the porch post. "So, you're basically the Empress's right-hand guy?" "Something like that." Varen looked around the valley, observing the cabin, the porch, and the simple wooden chair where the Empress had rested the night before. "It is remarkable," he said quietly. Elias frowned. "What is?" Varen gestured toward the porch. "The most powerful ruler in our galaxy chose to rest here." Elias shrugged. "She looked tired." Varen studied him carefully. "You truly did not know who she was?" "Nope." "You did not fear her?" Elias thought for a moment. "Well, I figured if she wanted to eat me, she would have done it already." The Chancellor chuckled softly. "That may be the most honest answer I have heard in years." Another massive explosion lit the sky above them. Both men looked up. The silver dragon was diving straight through the center of the enemy formation. Ships scattered in every direction. Moments later, the remaining enemy vessels began retreating toward space. The battle was ending. The dragons had won. Cheers echoed across the fleet as the surviving enemy ships fled beyond the atmosphere. Elias exhaled slowly. "Well, that was exciting." Varen turned back toward him. "You realize something important, human?" Elias tilted his head. "What?" "The Empress trusts you." Elias laughed. "She slept on my porch." "I wouldn't call that trust." Varen shook his head. "You allowed her to rest when she was wounded. You protected her when she was vulnerable. You treated her not as a ruler, but as a living creature in need." Elias stared at the ground for a moment. "I guess that's just what decent people do." Varen smiled. "Exactly." A massive shadow suddenly passed over the valley. Both men looked up. The Empress was returning. Her wings stretched wide as she glided down toward the clearing, landing with a thunderous impact that shook the trees. Smoke still curled from parts of her scales, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. Victorious. Alive. Unstoppable. She lowered her massive head beside the porch again. Elias folded his arms. "So, you won." The dragon rumbled proudly. Varen bowed deeply. "The enemy fleet has retreated. Their leadership has been destroyed." Elias nodded slowly. "Well, that's good news." But the Empress didn't leave. Instead, she leaned her head closer to Elias again. Very gently, very deliberately, she nudged him the same way she had the night before. Elias sighed. "Let me guess. You're staying another night?" The dragon gave a satisfied rumble. Varen looked shocked. "The Empress wishes to remain here?" Elias shrugged. "Well, the porch is still open." The silver dragon curled beside the cabin again, her massive body settling comfortably around the clearing. The fleet above slowly began departing the system. But the Empress stayed, right where she had slept the night before, on a quiet porch in a forgotten valley, beside the human who had unknowingly protected the ruler of the skies.